All right, it is that time once again. College football time here at Odd Shopper with Betting You. We are here to break down all things college football and find some winners this week. Heisman Trophy. We're going to paint the picture of who you need to bet, what big odds have a chance to cash, and of course, what type of players do win the Heisman Trophy. I am Ben Rasa. I am joined, of course, by Matt Gajewski to do just that. And Matt, I want to ask you, last week we got things started, talked a little transfers, talked just the landscape of college football. The off-season Heisman market, is that something that you look to in the futures? And is there kind of that formula where we can get an idea of who might be live to win this award?
Yeah, I think this is a beatable market. It's beatable primarily early in the offseason, and it rewards people that are following the news. They know the landscape of these teams. But not only that, you need to know who kind of traditionally wins the Heisman. There are a lot of really popular players out there that might not have the best odds and are actually kind of dead to win this award just based on the position they play, their conference, or maybe their team just isn't quite good enough to actually take down that Heisman award. So I do think this is a beatable market and one I try to attack every single offseason.
I like it as well. And I think we see that across a lot of sports where it's not, the quote unquote best player. Sometimes it's an amazing player in the right situation. There are guys in the NFL and certainly in the NBA that I think could win the award, and they ultimately don't because of that. And the Heisman Trophy is no different. So we're going to dive into that. Certainly going to try to find some winners for you guys to put some money on. But in the meantime, we want to give you the free money. That's the best part of the show is BetMGM powering this show, powering Betting You. And they've got a fantastic offer. So if you're a new user, it's very simple. Click the link in the description of this video, sign up and deposit $10. You can deposit more, but you only need $10 for this. You go, you take that money, bet it on any baseball game, any money line baseball team. It does not matter whether you like baseball or not. Just bet a team. If you win or lose, they give you $200. That's it. It's that simple. Take that money, do whatever you want with it. College football is only 60 days away. It's crazy. We would love a couple extra $100 to do some egregious things during the season, or maybe take some shots with these Heisman winners. So definitely go use the link in the description at BetMGM. Now, Matt, I want to ask you, before we dive into actual players, I want to talk a little about, you alluded already, there kind of is a profile. So is that how you start? You basically look historically at the Heisman winners, at what type of team, what type of profile, what type of position, and then you start to craft who could fit those type of narratives?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to be as smart with our money as possible. So you don't want to be betting players like as much as I love Coastal Carolina, you probably don't want to be betting like a Grayson McCall to win the Heisman, just because really G5 quarterbacks never win the Heisman. And you can look at this across a variety of cohorts of positions. So first of all, Power 5, if you go back to 2000, it's kind of when, like there's an easy stopgap where you can look at the modern day football. All 22 Heisman winners have been from the Power 5. You're really dead unless, I guess, like a Cincinnati were to make the playoff again, or a UCF that went undefeated a few years ago. So really you want to focus on Power 5 teams. Sorry to like the Malik Willis's last year. Those of you that made those bets were not very live to win the Heisman. And then you look at the position, 18 of the last 22 have been quarterbacks, 3 have been running backs, 1 at wide receiver, that was Devontae Smith. The average wins of these teams are 12. So it's a team that's very much playoff bound, almost undefeated. Average losses were 1.5. And if you look at the only Heisman winners that had more than 2 losses, they were these like elite dual threat quarterbacks. They were Lamar Jackson, Robert Griffin, and Tim Tebow. So if you're targeting a quarterback that is not on a team expected to go really far and have an excellent season, they should probably be awesome dual threats. And, that's basically it. We need quarterbacks on Power 5 teams that are legit contenders, and it really helps to be mobile.
So obviously those are ridiculously first thing that stood out to me, obviously quarterback dominates, but you didn't even mention defense. So can we just say Charles Woodson ain't walking through that door and just not even focus on one side of the ball, eliminate any defenders?
I think the defender would need to be somebody that plays special teams or like dabbles on offense a little bit, like maybe a Tyrann Mathieu, if you think back to his role with LSU. And I don't think we really have a player like that in this year's crop. So to me, defense is completely out.
No Ndamukong Suh's either, even though he didn't win. He should have won, and that's my whole point with this. All right, I want to work backwards a little bit because you just gave these trends. When you say, there's been 3 running backs, do you think they need to be able to catch the ball, or can it be a straight bell cow back?
I think catching the ball helps, but if you look at some of the players that actually occupied that role, I mean, Reggie Bush is one, so you have to go like way back in time for the Reggie Bush one. But the other backs were Alabama backs, Derrick Henry and Mark Ingram. Neither of them really caught the ball too much in college. They just played for teams that ultimately won the national championship and went undefeated. So I do think that is more important. If you play on a style of offense that maybe is a little more run centric, but you're still good enough to win the national title game, that's where I think it could happen. Unfortunately, the climate doesn't really work that way anymore. We have a lot of these up tempo pass heavy offenses. And the Alabama of old with like Jalen Hurts under center, they're just not there anymore. Bryce Young is dominating a pass friendly scheme there. So I think maybe it would take like an injury to Bryce Young, and then, like a Jahmyr Gibbs would handle, like 350 touches, still propel them to the national title picture for something like that to happen, but still pretty unlikely for the running backs.
It just seems more and more too. There are so many mobile quarterbacks that a lot of these backs, their numbers are dwarfed because you have quarterbacks that are getting some of that production at this point. Like when I think of those teams, I think of like AJ McCarron under center, who's just not giving you anything in terms of rushing, not the dual threats. Not that Bryce Young is running the ball, but I still look that it's a little different at this point. All right, so we've painted the profile. We're looking for really good teams with quarterbacks. Being mobile helps. It's no surprise in these odds. Obviously you want to shop them around, see what you can find. We're using some of them from DraftKings here. CJ Stroud is the favorite, around 2.5 to 1. Let me ask you this. Do you think that he should be the favorite?
Yeah, I do. And I like to talk about him in conjunction with Bryce Young because they are the two favorites. Plus 250 for Stroud, plus 350 for Bryce Young. I think this comes down to just path to the playoff. Again, wins and being a winning team and a playoff winning team is really important to this market. Unless you're like a Lamar Jackson runner, you're probably not going to be in consideration for the Heisman unless your team's in the playoff. So these guys are both excellent quarterbacks, both top 3 in terms of PFF grade. I think they're going to be right next to each other in terms of where they're drafted in the NFL draft. But Ohio State just has an easier path to the college football playoff. If they can get past the Big Ten East teams, they're going to cakewalk they're going to probably dismantle whoever comes out of the Big Ten West and end up in the college football playoff. Alabama, they can be cannibalized by some good teams in the SEC West. You have Texas A&M, Ole Miss, LSU, and I think Alabama's rightfully the favorite among those teams. But still, there's a chance. We saw Alabama dropped by Texas A&M last year. It's just a much more difficult schedule for them coming out of the SEC. So I think Stroud being the favorite does make sense.
Do you worry? Because, I mean, you've talked about this, and he obviously has a path regardless. I was stunned last year at it seemed like he was not even reluctant to run. He just wouldn't run under basically any circumstance. Do you think that needs to change for him to win the Heisman, or is he just able to do what he did last year? You talked about the path. Everything else sets up pretty well.
For Stroud?
Yeah.
I don't think he needs to run. Like, you could also look at Bryce Young.
Too.
He's a player that was recruited as a dual threat, seldom ran, and he won the Heisman basically as a pure pocket passer. Now, I think both these guys have mobility. They don't really use it as dual threats. They kind of use it to navigate the pocket, avoid pressure. And it's funny, Bryce Young was the best quarterback in the country under pressure last year. So again, he's not necessarily winning with his legs the way a traditional dual threat would be, but he's very much creating more time with that. And I think Stroud does the same thing. So I'm not worried too much about mobility with them. Plus, they're both on the most elite offenses in the country. They can throw the ball basically all over the yard. Elite players around them both. So I think just based on pure passing, they could get there.
This is kind of a weird question. Do you factor in anything positive or negatively with Bryce Young, considering he won the Heisman already?
I've talked to like some people about this, and they always like to bring up like people don't win the Heisman twice. It's really hard to be the best player in the entire country twice. I think there's a little bit of noise with this to begin with. I would say no. I think if Bryce Young has an electric season and they go to the playoff, win the title, I have nothing wrong with him winning the Heisman twice. I don't think that is a huge factor in the eyes of the people that actually named the winner of this award.
Fair enough. I tend to agree. It's one of those things. Yeah, people don't repeat for obvious reasons. It's extremely hard to do, and there's so many things that have to go perfectly right. It's not just they won't give it to a guy again. I think if he stands out and he's worthy, nothing is going to happen. Now, I'm not going to say it's a 2-horse race because there's plenty of other guys that we're going to get to and guys that I think have a shot. But there is a pretty big drop off to the third guy, who would be Caleb Williams, 9-1, the transfer from Oklahoma. He's at USC with Lincoln Riley. So where does he fit in? He does bring what I would say is more dual threat ability, but there's a lot of unknowns with a team like USA.
Yeah, he's probably among the top 3 right now, my favorite bet. Obviously this comes down to odds. 9-1 is a much better price than you're getting on Stroud or Young, but he's also more mobile. He is the easiest path to the playoff out of these guys. The Pac-12 is a significantly weaker conference, and now they haven't been represented in the playoff very often recently, but they haven't put together an undefeated season in a while. And USC is set up to do that right now. Their only competition in Utah basically sat out the recruiting process and the transfer portal, while Caleb Williams and USC bought their way to a potential contender, not just in the conference, but in the country. So with his dual threat ability, easy schedule, and path to the playoff, it's easy to foresee Caleb Williams right up there with Young and Stroud in terms of this discussion. So he is my favorite bet among the big 3 at 9-1.
I do like the price. 9-1 is a good number. I want to ask you this because this is another one of those. I think people throw this around a lot, and there's a lot of reasons for it. Typically, the West Coast is not as prevalent in the Heisman discussion. A lot of people say that's because the teams, they're playing at 10 o'clock at night. You don't get to see them. Mariota won it. Reggie Bush won it. But other than that, it's been dominated by the Oklahomas, SEC's teams of the world. Do you worry about that, or do you say if he's this good and they're undefeated, a blue blood program like USC, that'll all take care of itself?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of also correlates with the teams that are winning the titles. Like Oregon, that year the Mariota one was a fantastic team. They were 13-2, but you look at who's won the titles recently, it's dominated by the SEC. Alabama winning a lot of them. I mean, the teams that kind of deviated from that, you had Jameis Winston for that undefeated Florida State team. And when we go back to the early 2000s, I mean, we have Carson Palmer, Matt Leinart, and Reggie Bush winning the Heisman in 3 out of 4 years. Those are the years USC was dominating. So I don't think it's time. I think it's just literally who are the good teams, and the best players from those teams are typically in contention for this award. So Caleb Williams, if USC is able to return to that sort of powerhouse we saw early in the 2000s, I think he should firmly be in this discussion.
But obviously you're also saying that it is strongly correlated. USC can't have 4 losses this year and have him in this hunt, right?
When you look at the Heisman winners that have had more than 2 losses, they've been elite dual threats. So Lamar Jackson for that 9-4 Louisville team, he's one of them. I think if Caleb Williams were to have a Russian, RG3 is another one for Baylor. They were 10-3. And then Tim Tebow, he's the other one that had 4 losses, 9-4 for him on that Florida team. I think Caleb Williams can kind of rush like those guys. So I don't think USC having a few losses necessarily prevents him from being in this discussion, but it certainly would make it harder.
So we've talked 3 guys. Certainly a lot of the equity for the Heisman Trophy has been talked about already with Stroud, Young, and Caleb Williams. I think there's a very, very, very good chance one of them 3 hoist the trophy. If they don't, whoever else does is going to cash a big ticket for you because the odds are really getting steep quickly. And now we got my man who is not going to win the Heisman, but I'm still going to talk about him. I want to talk about Bijan Robinson. He's 20-1. He's a running back. I think he's the best running back in the country behind what could be a makeshift offensive line and an unknown at quarterback. So just talk to me a little about Texas in general. Do you think the situation under center helps him, hurts him, and does he have enough scenarios that he could get in the discussion?
I don't think he has enough scenarios where he can get into the discussion. I love him as a player, but I think he's the worst bet on the board for the Heisman right now, and I don't really think it's particularly close. He plays for Texas, a team that, they have Steve Sarkisian as their head coach. He's traditionally been balanced to maybe a little pass heavy when you look at him as a play caller. And the offense overall is going to be better, but there's still a team that doesn't really have a fantastic win total. And again, we need these teams to be elite. Texas sitting at 8 wins. That's not really going to get it done for a running back when we look and see Reggie Bush, Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry. All those teams had 1 loss or they were undefeated. So, Texas, I just don't think they're going to be good enough to propel a running back to actually win this award. And from there, with running back, you're also kind of towing this line. You need them to be just a monster on the ground. Bell cow opportunity, 300, 400 touches. Bijan has that in his range of outcomes, but the more you touch the ball at the running back position, the higher likelihood you get injured. And we can ask Bijan about this last year. He was out for the year. I mean, like week 8, week 9. So that's also a risk here too with Texas. Not to mention they have plenty of talent around Bijan. This is not an Alabama offense with Mark Ingram where they're just devoid of talent around him, but they have a solid offensive line that can pound the ball. The biggest question with Texas this year outside of Quinn Ewers at quarterback is their offensive line. They're not returning very much production. The production they do return is poor. Now they got a couple 5 stars in recruiting, just incoming freshmen. But again, those are incoming freshmen. It would take a lot for them to just come in and end up being like the Alabama offensive line that propelled Mark Ingram to a Heisman. So overall, I think Bijan, love him as a player. He's the worst Heisman bet on the board.
Tough scene. Yeah, I mean, Texas's win total, it is juiced to the over, but it's only at 8, just to give you an indication of where the books are kind of favoring them. If I had to make a bet on Texas, I'm not advocating doing this. I'd rather bet them to win the whole thing at like 60-1. You can get even better than that, just because I think there's not that much of a narrow bet. They have to be really good. And at 20-1, sadly, I have to agree with you. I do think that Bijan Robinson is one of the best players in college football, but it doesn't set up well for him at all to win the Heisman for a variety of reasons. Even if they're really good, I think that Ewers is going to get a lot of that, credit, and it's not going to be just the Bijan Robinson show. Now, the next guy up is another non-quarterback. I'm interested to see if you think he's also a terrible bet of the non-quarterbacks. He's someone we have to consider. And that's Smith-Njigba. He's sitting at 28-1. He had like 700 yards in the bowl game. I'm not even joking. It was just ungodly. He's a big-time player. I assume that all of Stroud's production, a lot of it's going to him this year. Does that keep him relevant? Or is it just if he has a huge year, that means Stroud did as well?
I think that's exactly it. We've only seen this circumstance play out one time. It was the Mac Jones Devontae Smith year. And think about what happened to Devontae Smith. Jalen Waddle went down in week 5. That's the only reason why he was able to funnel targets and receive that large of a target share on the year. Now, Ohio State lost their 2 top receivers in Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, but they have 4 and 5 stars at every single position, wide receiver included. Marvin Harrison's a young kid who's getting a lot of hype for this team. I don't think it's going to be just like the Devontae Smith show. Jackson Smith-Njigba will probably be one of the best receivers in the country, top 3 option, but I still don't think the production's concentrated enough for him to take down this award. It's only happened once in the last 22 years.
We saw this in the bowl game. I mean, he had correct me if I'm wrong, but he had a huge game. But guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. also had it's an assembly line of absolute studs there. They just bring in 5-star after 5-star. And there's going to be other guys to fill Wilson and Olave's production. I'm not saying he's not going to miss a beat. I'm not going to say he's not going to be the best receiver in the country, but is he going to be so far removed from everybody else? I think the answer is no. And we see with Stroud, I'm not sure he can separate enough. So it does help, I will say, that his quarterback isn't running a ton, because if you get the mobile quarterback with him, then it's even worse. But I just don't see it either. I tend to agree with you that him and Bijan Robinson, unfortunately, are not odds that are really worth considering.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It comes down to price here. There are some running backs and some receivers that you can find like 100-1. If it was closer to that price, sure, I'm willing to take a stab on a receiver with elite talent. Like we could even look at Jordan Addison. He's a player with far longer odds and I think a similar talent profile. And he's playing for an explosive offense that's going to be really good. So you can kind of find these arbitrage opportunities in players with much better prices that are they're not going later. They have just far better odds overall in similar situations.
All right, next up, we talked about Caleb Williams. Who replaced him? Dylan Gabriel did, 35-1. Oklahoma has had just a ridiculous run of Heisman Trophy winners, but it's just different now. Does that make it a situation at 35-1 that Dylan Gabriel could get in the mix? Or do you say that a lot of the Heisman equity is now at USC with their former coach?
I think Gabriel's a fine bet. He's a really interesting player to look at here. He's actually been moving down a little bit in terms of odds. He was 30-1 earlier this offseason. He's now 35-1. And I'm not really sure why. They do replace their coach, Lincoln Riley. And I mean, that's another positive we could probably talk about for Caleb Williams. His offense has already put out Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. But they moved to Jeff Lebby as OC. He's coached already at UCF. He just coached under Lane Kiffin last year. Those were explosive passing attacks. And we look at Gabriel. He was injured last year, but back in 2020, he was the number 3 quarterback in terms of PFF grade. He was orchestrating these elite up-tempo pass-heavy offenses. And now he moves to Oklahoma, where he's in line to do the same for a team that has a 10.5 win total, which is the highest on the board. You look at Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, USC. All these teams have 10.5 win totals, and they all have passed to the playoff. Oklahoma should be the favorite in this conference. And if they can make the playoff again on the back of Gabriel, love this price here at 35-1.
Any rushing upside?
Not really. He's more of just your scrambler, situational dual threat. He's going to pick up yards when, the plays break down around him, but they're not going to use him on design runs.
And you just referenced this Oklahoma, in the Big 12 is, they're inside 2-1 to win that conference. I do think they have a pretty distinct advantage over Texas. It'll be a big game. It always is. But Dylan Gabriel's poised for a pretty big year, and we have seen the talent. There's no doubt about it. I'm okay with that 35-1. I like him better. So the next guy on the list is also 35-1. It's Clemson's quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei. I don't really you're going to have to explain this to me, because this is obviously one of the many reasons I love doing the show. Is he even confirmed that it's his job, or is he potentially not even going to be the guy?
He might not be the guy. All reports coming out of camp are that he's ahead of Klubnik, their 5-star number 1 overall recruit at the quarterback position. But that doesn't mean that Uiagalelei is going to hold this job for the whole season. And he played poorly enough where I think that's a concern moving forward. He was one of the worst quarterbacks in the ACC last year.
It was bad. The
mobility is not great. He's more like this big bruising quarterback. Like, he's good in short yardage, but he's not a solid dual threat, so he doesn't have that going for him. Clemson completely abandoned the pass at the end of the year, just fully rode their offensive line and Will Shipley in the run game. With the 5-star coming in, Klubnik, I don't know about this job security at all. And this is kind of the case with any of these big programs that have the quarterback issues, I should say. You're always going to have a 5-star, 4-star behind him. Uiagalelei was benched multiple times last year. He ended up being the best option among a bunch of really bad options. But the leash has got to be really short here. Clemson's going to be awesome, so they do fit at least that box. But right now, I'm staying away from Uiagalelei just on a pure talent profile. He was bad.
I don't like it either. I will say one thing that is good with a bet like this, it's extremely correlated. Like, if he sucks, it doesn't really matter if he gets benched, because if he was bad enough to get benched, he's not winning the Heisman, so your bet was dead anyway. And if he's amazing and he's in the Heisman conversation, they're not going to yank him for a 5-star if they're absolutely rolling. I just didn't like what I saw. I know that Clemson just had a kind of a lost season, and they had an opportunity to beat Georgia early, and then nothing really happened. I just worry about exactly what this offense is going to look like. You mentioned Shipley in the backfield. I'm not sure I see the path. For me, I'll say this, and then we can move on and we'll open it up a little bit. I would rather bet Dylan Gabriel or Van Dyke at the same price for Miami over him in terms of the market.
Yeah, I like Van Dyke too. That's a team that should be pretty good there. If you look across betting lines, it seems like Miami's the favorite to be second in this conference. And I mean, they're going to have a tough game this year against Clemson. But Van Dyke, the only issue is he's not really mobile. And if this Miami team does end up with a lot of losses, I don't really see a path for him getting there. You look at Miami's win total overall, it's definitely lower than some of the elite programs here in the country. So that is a concern. But I think Van Dyke is, I mean, the job security is there, so he has to be a better bet than Uiagalelei, right?
I also like teams that, and maybe this is counterintuitive, but when I think about guys in this range, I actually would like a team that's not budgeted in for just top ceiling, because if Miami exceeds expectations, it's going to be because of Van Dyke. And then it's like, wow, Miami is way better than everybody thought. They're getting a lot of press. They're the best team in the ACC. If Clemson's the best team in the ACC, that's not breaking news. They're supposed to be. But a team like Miami has that upside kind of incurred, and I think that could drag a guy like Van Dyke to the Heisman conversation if they end up being that good.
Yeah, the best example of this in recent memory is Joe Burrow, a team that wasn't necessarily expected to finish number 1 in their conference, but they end up getting a really solid season, largely on the back of Joe Burrow, who is kind of an unproven player. He played the one season, but he took an immense step forward. If Van Dyke is able to take that same step forward or a similar step forward, and then, Miami rattles off a couple upsets. Maybe they beat Clemson and they end up with the representative from the ACC. That's the path to them potentially putting up Van Dyke as the Heisman winner.
Yeah, if you're not straight like dynasty, like where it's like this team's going undefeated and they're that good, that's obviously the easiest path. I would rather have a team that's lurking, that's the surprise team with upside in terms of the conversation. I think Miami fits that type of profile. If you're enjoying this, I know it's the offseason, but if you're enjoying college football, make sure you stick around. Hit the like button, of course, but subscribe to this channel. We want to build it up. Obviously, you're going to be seeing plenty of us during the year, giving our best bets, breaking it all down, every slate. Do not worry, short form, long form, we have you covered here at Betting You and here at Odd Shopper. Now, when you look at the board, now it starts to get a little crowded. There's a lot of guys that are sitting like 40 to 50 to 1. I mean, there's a Will Anderson is in here. I mean, there's just all different types of players. I assume he's not the answer. If you want to throw, are there a couple guys in that crowded range that you like best?
Will Anderson, he's certainly not the answer, unfortunately. No. This range is really hard because, you're starting to sacrifice some of those boxes we talked about earlier. Like maybe the win total for these teams isn't the highest. Maybe they're not playing for Power 5 teams. You're looking at like Trevion Henderson, who doesn't play quarterback, Will Anderson on defense. So I mean, this like 40 to like 60 to 1 range isn't a range I like very much. Anthony Richardson from Florida has elite dual threat ability. He's sitting at 40 to 1. Now, Florida has a pretty bad win total this year. That's 7. So, I mean, they're not going to be good enough, I think, for him to get there. But he is the dual threat that I think is requisite to get there. Keaton Slovis is 40 to 1. He's a player that's never quite lived up to that freshman year. He moves over to Pitt. A lot of concerns there. They lose a lot of really good options, including Jordan Addison, their OC. He's not mobile whatsoever, and they have a worse win total than a lot of teams in the ACC, so I don't love him. Spencer Rattler for South Carolina. South Carolina's win total is just 6, and I don't think either of us are going to argue that they're going to be the representative from the SEC East. Trevion Henderson, he plays the running back for Ohio State, but it's largely a pass-heavy offense, and he's going to split time. He's definitely not the locked-in RB1 in that offense. I mean, he is, but he's not the same caliber RB1 as some other offenses in the country. That's largely been a timeshare through Ohio State. And I mean, like Jackson Dart at 45 to 1, he might not even have the starting job. Hendon Hooker, it's kind of the same thing as, like a Spencer Rattler. How good is Tennessee going to be? Can they actually get enough wins for Hooker to win it? Quinn Ewers is really the only player in this range that makes sense to me. And it's because Texas has a solid win total at 8. He's largely going to be unquestioned as the QB there. I think he has solid mobility. We haven't really seen it. It's just his price continues to rise. He was 50 to 1 early in the offseason. He's up to 45 to 1 now. How high does that continue to rise? So if you want to bet Ewers, I think the time is now.
Yeah, I think that first of all, he's the biggest unknown, and that's a good thing when you're getting big odds because there's just a chance he's amazing and he drags Texas to kind of like that Miami correlation. Maybe they overtake Oklahoma. Certainly Bijan will have a part, but I think if they are a really good offense, Quinn Ewers is going to be the story, and he's going to get some steam here. You mentioned, you know who you left off was Bo Nix, your boy. He's not going to win the Heisman. He's not going to win much of anything. But I got one more name here, and I think this is an interesting conversation because we've seen this, and obviously the comparisons are going to be made. They've been made a lot. Malik Cunningham at Louisville is dynamic, incredible player. Louisville's not a great team. Lamar Jackson showed that obviously that can be overtaken with just elite skill. Is it the same situation, though, or is this people trying to push that narrative just because obviously same school and same athletic ability?
Yeah, Lamar Jackson got to 9 wins, 4 losses in that year where he took down the Heisman. My question is, I think that's kind of a floor. You need to be like at least that good. Can Louisville get there? And I think the team around them is just not very good. They're projected for 6.5 wins this year, which is just downright pitiful for this team. They're losing a lot of production. They had some transfers leave. So unless Malik just does this on his own, I don't think Louisville's going to be good enough for him to win the Heisman. So he's kind of another player I would rather just avoid and then take some longer shots who have maybe a similar chance of winning.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Like I said, I get it with his numbers are going to stand out amongst this range. But they could flirt with like bowl eligibility. That's just it's not gonna work in a Heisman Trophy. I think Louisville could be pretty rough, no joke. Like even if he has good numbers, I don't like that team at all. So I'm not really there. All right, we've crossed 50 to 1. there's still a bunch of names that I want to talk about, including Will Levis is here. Your boy Braylon Allen is here. How do you go about, do you reevaluate your criteria when you're talking about guys 60, 70 to 1? Or do you say, I'm still looking for, it's just lower percentage, teams that could have immaculate records and guys that are going to put up absolutely insane numbers?
There are still players in this range that check all the boxes. Power 5 quarterbacks on good teams. Some of them have rushing ability, but once you get like past 60 to 1, that's where I'm willing to at least sacrifice some of these things for a low probability outcome. Because again, like some running backs do win. Devontae Smith won. And there are quarterbacks that don't play necessarily on the best teams that end up winning this award too, largely through their mobility. And again, you're just taking on long odds in this case. I think you can sacrifice a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely teams. Obviously, like I said, Will Levis, Will Rogers. I see Jamar Gibbs at 60 to 1 for Alabama. Do you start playing the scenario game here as well? Like, okay, this guy, he doesn't have a great shot, but if one thing happens that's, fluky or unknown, there's an injury, all of a sudden, this guy would be, on the short list for Heisman. Is that a reasonable way to do it here when you're saying at 100 to 1, if one thing breaks my way, now this guy would be, his odds would be, 30 to 1?
Yeah, the thing with the injuries, you need them to happen early in the year if they're going to happen, because you need to play a whole season or like most of it. Like the year even Trevor Lawrence took over for Kelly Bryant, I don't think he was really live to win that award because he missed 4 games. Now, there are a couple situations I think that have already broken kind of right, like a Jahmyr Gibbs for Alabama at 60 to 1. If I'm going to target a running back, it's probably him, or maybe we could talk about some even longer shots. But he plays on an elite team, a team that's favored to win the national title. He now is a play caller in Bill O'Brien, who historically has just pounded their bell cow back. And behind him, I mean, we're looking at a lot of really unproven guys: Trey Sanders, Jason McClellan, Roydell Williams, and of course, they'll have 4 and 5 stars coming in. But really unproven players behind him. Jahmyr Gibbs is an excellent pass catcher, which he displayed at Georgia Tech. So I think he's a player you could maybe sacrifice the quarterback position because he's on a team that, can run the ball a lot. They're going to be really good running the ball. Replace just 2 starters in the offensive line. And one of the guys coming in is a premier transfer in Tyler Steen from Vandy. So he's a player I think you could sacrifice just the position value and take a 60 to 1, which is why I'm kind of out on Bijan. I don't really see the difference in terms of player and role. And if anything, Alabama is just a much better team than Texas.
So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to do a little rank them here. I got 3 quarterbacks that I think are pretty similar. They're, I'd say, medium to upper range SEC teams that aren't the team. You've got Will Levis, you've got Will Rogers, you've got KJ Jefferson. They're all 60 to 1. Do you like any of them? Is there one that you would say, okay, if I had a few extra bucks, this is where I'd put it?
I really don't like any of these guys too much. I think my favorite would be Will Levis,
of course,
because he's mobile and Kentucky's in the East. Like when he
made us rich.
What's that?
He made us rich last year. Kentucky was the ultimate cash cow.
You do have some issues though with Kentucky. They're replacing their OC, which is not something I like. They bring in Rich Scangarello, who's kind of like a failed play caller at the NFL level. We'll see if he's able to move to the college level and have some success. He most recently coached quarterbacks in 2021 for the 49ers. So he has worked with some dual threats, got to work with Lance and Garoppolo, and they played well. But how much of that was him? How much of that was Shanahan? I'm not sure. So you do replace him, and the offense last year was absolutely electric. You lose Wandale, so I'm not sure Kentucky's going to have some of the juice they had last year. The same thing can kind of be said at Arkansas. So you still have Sam Pittman and Kendall Briles leading the offense. Briles in particular is their OC. He was awesome at getting his best playmakers the ball, but just losing Treylon Burks is going to be huge for this team. KJ Jefferson does have elite dual threat ability. I think we need to take a step forward as a passer for him to be in consideration to win this award. And then just how do they replace the Burks production? They bring in Hazelwood from Oklahoma, but still I'm not quite sure that they'll have the same level of receivers that they had last year.
You mentioned, and this is something I really, not that Will Levis Heisman talk I think is too serious, but I was so impressed. They were a team that I bet on a lot last year. Liam Cohn was an absolute stud for that offense, the offense coordinator. I don't know honestly where he went, but he is not there anymore. As you mentioned, so I could see that taking a step back. I don't really like even though with Mississippi State, even though they throw the ball like 80 times, you're just saying it's kind of, useless statistics.
Yeah, we've had Mike Leach in college football for a long time now, and he's never been with a good team. And how many times has he put up a Heisman contender? The Mississippi State offense is checkdowns. So they have really high completion percentages and solid numbers based on raw volume. But ultimately, Mike Leach's teams are never good enough to compete. So I think he's kind of a dead bet here too. Plus, he's not mobile. He can't run.
No, I don't like Mississippi State. They also play on the murderer side of that. It's such a tough schedule. They have a lot of elite defenses, and he'll get his numbers, but I just don't see any way that they're representing much of anything outside a made-up bowl game in early December. All right. We got about 10 minutes left. We got some names. I want to ask you specifically, you already talked about this guy, but more if Uiagalelei gets benched. If we got word that it's Klubnik's job, is that something at 60-1 that you would say, okay, he's going to have the same opportunities that DJ Uiagalelei had, and we don't know how good this kid is, kind of like yours, I'll take my shot there? Or would you need to know that it's his job before placing that bet?
I'll place the bet right now. The odds would change if he was named the starter. You just need him to win the job, I think, in summer camp. Ideally, it can't happen any later than that. But I mean, maybe if he took it in week 2, he'd still be live. He's the number 1 recruit at quarterback in the country. He allegedly has some dual threat ability. Again, we're talking like high school numbers, so we truly don't know. And that's why he's so cheap at 60-1. But Clemson, they're another team like up there with Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia. They check every box. He's Power 5. He's on a team that's projected to win 10.5 games. He's a QB, and he appears to be mobile. That's every single box. It's just we don't know about the job security.
Couple other guys, and then the floor is yours for anyone that I missed. Jayden Daniels, the transfer. He's not Joe Burrow. He does have some similar paths in terms of he's coming to LSU. He was at Arizona State, obviously, not Ohio State. 70-1. I mean, if LSU is great, sure, but I don't think they're going to be improved, but I don't think they're going to be even near the perennial conversation that we've seen them in recent years.
I don't think so either, but I think there's enough paths to them being awesome where we could take Daniels. And, like Burrow coming into his final season with LSU, he's largely a pocket passer. Jayden Daniels has like elite dual threat ability, so I think he has more paths to winning this award. He can do it with his legs, and he's been serviceable as a passer. When you look at this LSU offense around him, they're actually a team that has a lot in place, like Kayshon Boutte is back, and there were a lot of injuries, so you saw players like Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Jack Beck, Jeray Jenkins. They got a lot of snaps last year. And if they take a step forward, I think you have a pretty good amount of weapons around him. And then, you worry about the team overall. Like, are they going to be good enough? They've absolutely attacked the transfer portal under Kelly. So I think they'll be good. The question for me is, will they be good enough? Will they win more than 7 games? And can Jayden Daniels be the player that gets them above their win total for him to even be in consideration? But 70-1, enough pass here. Mobile quarterback, SEC team. Decent win total, not great. That's the biggest knock. And he plays QB. So I'm willing to take a shot.
I mean, it's coming off of Herm Edwards' coach team, so maybe that was the problem. That's very,
always
very
the problem.
That is always there.
Notice every one of his good players left.
Yeah, and now they're probably going to be. We'll find out. This is going to be very telling, particularly with Daniels, because he has got every tool, dual threat. I want to see him in what I would view as a more competent situation. All right. I mean, we're at now triple-digit-esque guys. Is it just still we're going to stick with the blueprint? If you're a legitimate quarterback on a team that has a path, we can look to you. How do you go about this, and what names do you think are worth it even considering for an upside lotto type ticket?
I mean, I'm always still trying to check the boxes, and I think there is a player 100-1 that checks almost every single box in Cam Rising for Utah. So he's a quarterback. He's a dual threat quarterback, a pretty good one at that. You look at what he did last year. He rushed for 499 yards, and he didn't even start every game. They were still flirting with the Charlie Brewer show, cost them games early in the year and arguably a position in the playoff, because we saw this team actually hang with Ohio State in the bowl game until it was Cam Rising that suffered a concussion and had to leave the game. They were kind of dead walking after that. But Cam Rising, so he plays quarterback for a Power 5 team, and he has solid mobility. Utah has a pretty good win total. We look at where they're sitting right now. Utah is a team that is probably going to win 9 games based on their win total. They're projected exactly at 9. They're right behind USC. USC's at 9.5. So just slightly longer odds to win the Pac-12, but certainly there. So if this team wins the Pac-12 on the back of a strong dual threat season from Cam Rising, 100-1 are just ridiculous odds for a quarterback that literally checks every single box we're looking for.
Couple things that I like about that situation. One, they open with Florida. That's a good game, a pretty big time game. Not that Florida's going to be elite, but that's a good non-conference one if you can get it done. 2, there is a chance that USC is really good, and when they play, it could actually be a noteworthy game where you have 2 elite programs going at it. Because the problem, I think, at some points with the Pac-12 in recent years, even if you have a good team, they don't have a rival. Everyone else has like 4 losses, and there's not that marquee matchup. I think there could be a collision course with Utah and USC this year. And if a guy like Rising outduels Caleb Williams, he could be that representative from the West Coast. So I don't mind that. I don't think that Utah is going to be quite as good as they were last year, but there is a path. And you're talking about, again, 100-1. The numbers dictate all of this.
For sure. And I mean, like, the second best team in the Pac-12, according to betting odds, and very close to USC, Caleb Williams, he's 9-1. Cam Rising is 100-1. There's no question who I'd rather bet here. I mean, like, if you were handicapping a potential Utah versus USC, let's say a neutral game, so we don't have to worry about home away, what do you think the line would be?
4.5.
Yeah, I was going to say around a field goal. We've seen some pretty crazy movement in the Utah game against Florida. They opened as like a 3-point dog. Now they're 2.5, 3-point favorite in some spots. It did bet Utah very early on. That's neither here nor there. But I mean, you're seeing this team getting a lot of hype.
Yeah, I mean, listen, last year I was pretty adamant that and this is not how it works, but if you took the 4 best teams at the time, Utah was one of the 4 best teams. They were playing out of their minds late in the year. You mentioned the Charlie Brewer situation. Utah could have and possibly should have been in the playoff last year.
Yeah, unfortunate to say, but they did that to themselves.
Oh, it was completely their fault.
And
they should have fools.
Their biggest hindrance this year, I think, is going to be just not competing on the same level as USC. So, I mean, like, they were 38th in recruiting, 47th in the transfer portal. Those are decent numbers, but I mean, if you're going to try to keep up with USC, who's near the top of the list in both metrics, you can't just stay stagnant like this. Utah only recruited 4 4-stars. Like, that's just not going to fly in the new Pac-12, where you can have some of these programs now with NIL money kind of flexing their muscle, USC being one. Oregon's a team I think that could get better with the new current climate. They won't be great this year, but down the line, like, if Utah is going to continue to compete with these teams, they can't just be like the 36th overall team when you look at the composite between recruiting and transfers. It's just not going to fly.
Last name, then we'll give a quick recap of kind of how we want to structure our card. Another name that I just want to throw out there. Do I think he's going to win the Heisman? No. But Brennan Armstrong is just for the DFS slates, it doesn't get any better than him. He's cashing bonuses all over the place. Virginia's not a great team, but I think the ACC, besides Clemson, is wildly erratic. 100-1, a guy that statistically could be the best, prolific quarterback in terms of numbers. What do you think of Brennan Armstrong?
I like Armstrong. I just have so many concerns with Virginia. They've lost some players transferring out. They're changing coaches. Tony Elliott's coming in from Clemson. He's a guy that's been content running the ball at times. I think Armstrong really thrived on that Virginia scheme, which was super up-tempo, and they were balanced. But just with the raw amount of plays they ran and the receiving talent he had, Armstrong was kind of propelled to fantasy success for that reason. And they bring in like Des Kitchens as their offensive coordinator. He most recently was the Falcons running back in 2021, coached running backs at South Carolina before then. So, I mean, like, he doesn't have the greatest pedigree. I'm kind of just worried about the offense slowing down, continuing to be balanced, and using more of their rushing attack, which Armstrong is involved in. But does he have that Lamar Jackson style kind of running to overcome a poor win total? Virginia's win total right now is 7.5. So they're kind of in that like Louisville, South Carolina, Florida range, which we're not too happy about.
Yeah, it's a good point about we've seen this time and time again, new scheme, new coaches. Not that. What was the guy at East Carolina? Not the
Colton
coach.
Nailers.
Yeah, him. You remember when he was running for like 400 yards a game, and then he had like 3 carries in the season for no reason.
Yeah.
Those
I
were
just did East Carolina. It's so sad to see his rushing production has dropped every single year he's been the starter.
no respect, but it is true. A guy like Armstrong, because they don't have a path to prominence, it's going to have to be pure numbers. He's going after the Lamar Jackson formula, where it's like you have video game numbers and you incur 4 losses, but his numbers are far and away good enough. If they're even close to any of these other guys, he has no chance, because those other guys' teams are going to have 10, 11 wins, and he's going to have 7 or 8. That's where I'm going. Anyone else? And how do you structure your card? Give us a quick recap.
Yeah, I'm going to run through a couple long shots. These are players that are 100 to 1 or better. So JJ McCarthy from Michigan, I list him because he's extremely mobile. He probably needs an injury to McNamara to get there. So still probably not one I'll bet. Luke Altmaier is really interesting for Ole Miss. He'll be in that Lane Kiffin system. They haven't named a starter, and this appears like it's going to be a summer battle between him and USC transfer Jackson Dart. So if Altmaier wins, just an extremely fantasy-friendly situation. So Altmaier, he's a player that could have like Matt Corral numbers. I don't know if they'll be good enough for him to win the Heisman. We didn't even see Matt Corral really in this conversation too much last year. So Altmaier, but still 100 to 1. Maybe you could look there. Texas Tech under Tyler Show. So they bring in the old Western Kentucky OC, Kitley, I believe his name is. It's going to be like similar to what Mississippi State puts out there, but it's not priced like it. Tyler Show is the quarterback there, 100 to 1 for him. Notre Dame is looking to replace Jack Cohn as the starter. Tyler Buckner is a player that has really good mobility, and Notre Dame still should be pretty good with Freeman. He was an in-house replacement, their DC. He'll now be coaching the team. They didn't lose too much in the portal either. So Notre Dame, they're always kind of flirting with that college football playoff situation. They probably will need to go undefeated, which is going to be hard for them in their schedule. But again, you're getting a quarterback with mobility, 100 to 1. Will Shipley and Zach Evans, I guess Zach Charbonnet is on this list too, are running back long shots I'd be willing to take shots on, particularly Shipley and Evans. Shipley plays for Clemson, 10.5 win total, could very easily get to the playoff and win if they figure out their QB situation. Evans, he's transferring to Ole Miss from TCU. So again, he's part of that Lane Kiffin system. And Charbonnet was just awesome on UCLA. UCLA quietly has a really good win total this year. You just don't see DTR too high in these rankings, but they're going to run a ton of plays under that Chip Kelly system. But because of the dual threat ability of Thompson, they're going to be skewed heavily towards the run. We already saw that benefit Charbonnet, and now he's kind of the lone back in this offense. Britton Brown moved on from the team. So those are some of the long shots I have some interest in. Your second question, how I'm kind of building my card out. I'm not taking either Young or Stroud. They're just priced way too high for me. Like, I'm not going to take a 2 to 1 or a 3 to 1 to win the Heisman where you're locking up your money for an entire year and then you're still not even getting paid out for being right. So the worst odds I'm willing to take, Caleb Williams 9 to 1, just a smaller bet on him at USC. He has everything you'd want in a quarterback. Dylan Gabriel is a player I did place a wager on 35 to 1. He again checks every single box playing quarterback for Oklahoma except the mobility. He's another player I think is fine. And from there, it's basically long shots. Cam Rising is my favorite one for Utah at 100 to 1 because he checks the same boxes as those players up at the top. Jayden Daniels is another player on my card at 70 to 1 for LSU for the same reason. And then a sprinkle on some of those long shots, Buckner being the favorite of the group for me.
I like it. I totally agree. I'm in line with that. I'm going to throw in 2 other names that I think that Quinn Ewers, just because we don't know if you can still find 45 to 50 to 1. I do think that Texas has passed. And then I'll admit, I do think it's pretty thin, but I am just a really big fan of Tyler Van Dyke for Miami. He's 35 to 1. I'll admit, I think Gabriel's the better bet at that same number, but Van Dyke, this kid is a player, and I think that Miami could be sneaky good in the ACC. If they are the best team there, don't be surprised if he makes it. I know you get a participation trophy if you're watching some other guy hoist the trophy in person, but you know what? At 35 to 1, if he can just make it there, I'll consider that an accomplishment. I think he has a real chance to put up some big numbers this year.
Yeah, I mean, like the main competition's Clemson. We saw Clemson drop 3 games last year because they couldn't figure out their quarterback situation. That's conceivable this year. Who benefits in that situation? Well, the team with the second best odds in the ACC is Miami. So Van Dyke does make some sense there.
And I don't think Pittsburgh and Wake are going to be nearly as good. So it's up for grabs in that conference. There you have it. Heisman Trophy conversations. Again, a couple quick things. Thanks to BetMGM powering that show. Use the link in the description of this video. Go sign up and get your $200 free there. No reason not to do that. And of course, stay tuned. We have a lot of things dropping in the college football world. You're going to be seeing me and Matt doing an episode each and every week. We're going to be putting short, quick hitter videos out there, and all of the data will start appearing on the site. So just stay tuned here at OddsShopper and Stochastic. For me, for Matt, for everyone here at Betting You, good luck, enjoy, and stay tuned for even more college football coming up soon. See ya.